Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special edition of the Fair Game Podcast. We've got a special guest with us today. This young lady, I had the privilege of meeting her in Salt Lake City at the 2023 IFE convention. I think what impressed me the most about her was her ability to speak and interact with adults around her and do so with confidence, not the kind of confidence you typically see in a teenager these days. And it really should come as no surprise given the blue jacket that she's wearing today so proudly. She's the state president of the New York FFA organization, and she joins us today from New York. She is Ella Underberg. Ella, it's great to have you on the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So FFA, I cannot sing the praises of this organization enough. Whichever fairs that I attend, wherever I'm at in the country, I never have to worry about FFA kids. Like other kids will show up and they'll try to destroy my exhibit and they cause trouble. But when those blue jackets, especially when you all have those blue jackets on, there's something about that. What is it about FFA that turns out such incredible young people?
I think that the way that we're able to involve youth in agriculture through competitions and conferences is kind of like none other. And the way that we're able to tie FFA into their in the classroom learning, we never let them forget about it. So FFA is part of a three-circle model that ties together in classroom learning with competitions and conferences, and then with a project that they can decide on their own. But I think in general, I'm sure you can agree, the agriculture industry just does such a good job of fostering and shaping young leaders of the future. And I think that the agriculture community just kind of naturally does that on its own. The people that are within the agriculture community are kind of like none other. FFA, just the way that we're able to turn out leaders, I mean, I'm constantly impressed by our members.
Yeah, you guys have, it must just be something that is in the culture of the FFA organization about respect and character and responsibility. I think in all the years that I've been working fairs, which is, I'm going to say we're coming up on 20 years, actually. It's 2024. It is 20 years. Congratulations to me. And all those years, I think I've only had to have a word on an FFA kid like 3 times. And one of the times, I was at Hillsborough County Fair down in Florida, and the kiddo was getting a little rambunctious, and I walked up to them and I said, "That's a nice blue jacket you're wearing." And he went, "Huh? Oh, thanks." And I said, "Do you suppose your behavior reflects that blue jacket?" And he goes, "I'm sorry, you're right. I was being disrespectful. It won't happen again." And boom, behavior corrected. Like that's it. There's so I'll just say this. I sing y'all's praises. I love you guys. It's just such a great organization, and you guys do turn out really strong leaders. How did you get started in FFA?
So I have an older sister who's 15 months older than me. So when I was in fifth grade, she joined FFA with all of her friends. And we come from a long line of agriculturalists. My grandfather runs a dairy farm. My uncle is a maple producer. Many of my aunts and uncles are part of the Erie County Agricultural Society. So it was no surprise that my sister and I would find our place in FFA after showing through 4-H for so many years. But when I reached sixth grade, my sister was like, Ella, like, this is amazing. You've got to come to these meetings every month. And I was like, oh, like, I think I'd rather hang out with friends. And she's like, no, there'll be cookies. And I'm like, all right, I'm in. So
So
whether it
cookies are
was,
the way to your heart. I got it.
yep. And we still use that trick. You would not believe how many members were able to get involved through a box of cookies.
What kind now?
Um,
What now? Be clear. What kind of cookies? Because if I ever got to
chocolate,
bribe you in the future, like I need to know.
chocolate chip, just
Oh,
plain
amen.
chocolate.
God bless you, girl.
And then I've had the privilege of being a member under two very great advisors. So my first advisor, Mr. Buskus, I was in sixth grade. I was really little. I was definitely not the same person I am now. He was like, you need to get involved in a contest. And I was like, I don't think so. And he was like, nope, I already signed you up. You're going to do people in ag and you're going to do extemporaneous speaking. And I was like, all right, got it. We're
Oh,
doing it. Um, and then from there on, I've done a competition every single year. And then when I was a freshman, I had the honor of now having the advisor, Miss Nickerson, and she kept with that same mentality of, I'm going to volunteer you how things are going to work, and you're going to do them.
This is superb. So you kind of you alluded to different projects and some extemporaneous speaking and things like that. I know that's just the very tip of the iceberg. What does participation in FFA entail?
So participation for all of our members can look a little bit different. National FFA is working on a full affiliation model right now, but personally in New York FFA, we already have full affiliation. So if your high school offers an agriculture education course, you're automatically an FFA member. And the benefits we've seen with that is FFA members are then allowed to choose how much they want to get involved. So if they are really interested in community service, they're able to serve as the chapter level, get involved with their community, get involved with community leaders, serve at their meetings, maybe serve as a chapter officer.
Hmm.
But FFA offers the opportunity for then you to get involved with contests and conferences, serve as a district level, state level, potentially a national level, and go to national conventions and state conventions. So involvement can really look different for each member, depending
Right.
on how much they want to participate.
It seems like you're heavily involved.
Yes.
So, if you can talk about the biggest challenge that you had to overcome as you grew and came up through the ranks in FFA.
Yeah, so I would say my biggest challenge through FFA was kind of figuring out who I was myself. So through how I just talked about, participation can look different for each members, and my participation has looked a little bit different over the years. I'm a very involved person, so I am in many different organizations and clubs, and for me, it was kind of figuring out what meant most to me, and where do I want to involve myself and put my time. So just like any high schooler and things like that, I've kind of bounced around on what kind of means most to me. But then I kind of settled in FFA and its values and the leadership and the opportunities that are offered. So being able to learn how to balance my time and where to put all my strengths and things like that is kind of one of the biggest challenges I had to come through in FFA.
Yeah, that whole time management thing, that's kind of a I would say very much a teenage thing, but the fact is I'm 44 and I still struggle with it. So it's definitely that's had a positive impact. I mean, you alluded a little bit there on some of those challenges you overcome. Um, but for you personally, as a whole person, what kind of impact has FFA had on you?
I think FFA has kind of kept me in line with the agriculture industry. Throughout high school, kind of bounced around the idea of maybe going into photography or graphic design or things like that. But FFA has kind of found the leadership within myself and kind of sucked it out and put it out there for everybody to see. In FFA, I was able to serve as a chapter president, and then my senior year, I served as a district president and now state president. FFA has kind of helped me figure out maybe a future career path. It's helped me find my major in college and things like that, and it's kind of introduced me to the idea of networking. That's how we met,
Yep.
but offering me different opportunities to go and meet people and experience different aspects of the ag industry that I maybe would not have known if it weren't for those opportunities.
What kind of different aspects of the ag industry were you exposed to?
I've always been involved with the fair industry, but I live in a very diverse state. From the great big lights in New York City down to the rurals in upstate New York and the different farms we produce. During our state officer tour, which is a tour that we do in September for all the New York officers, we pile into this minivan and we drive across the state for 8 days, visiting as many of our members as we can. On the very last day of this tour, I was able to actually go to New York City for the very first time. And we were able to visit the New York Harbor School, which is a high school on Governor's Island, which I thought was like the coolest thing ever. And I've
Oh,
never really thought about marine sciences and things like that as being a part of agriculture. I have never been more wrong in my entire life.
yep.
I was able to talk to their students, and they study under 7 different CTE programs that offer from sustainability to vessel operations and professional diving. And they're working with the New York Harbor Project to restore the harbor by 2030. And the amount of knowledge that these kids have of understanding sustainability in the future and what the effects of the harbor are going to have on not just New York, but all different states within like the next 10 years.
Yeah. That's pretty wild. All that just from, you pick up all that from one visit, and how far reaching the ag in our country, like it's everywhere. Like people hear ag and they think, oh, that's corn, that's farmers. But it just goes so deep into like the roots of our nation and sustainability for the future. I think about, and I always forget the stat. I know it changes time to time because Aaron Alejandro, who's the head of Texas FFA Foundation, he and I were just talking on the phone yesterday, and here I am missing the stat again, but it's something to the effect of like over the next 30 years, we're going to have to produce like 80% more food than we currently produce. Numbers that are just staggering when you actually think about the amount of food that we as a nation produce, not just for our people, but for nations all around the world. How do we do that? How do we get there? And those ag sciences, it's, frankly, it's young people like you that will ultimately get us there.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy. Less than 2% is doing that for the world, and just the sheer amount of work and compassion and graciousness that goes into doing that. And I was talking with my state advisor just this past weekend about the members in FFA that we're training today. And we're actually training for them for the world's issues in 5 to 10 years down the line when they're going to be out of college and trade school and things like that. They're going to be solving problems that are 5 to 10 years down the line.
Sure.
So just the sheer complexity of everything that we're doing within the agriculture community just amazes me every day.
Well, and it seems like you guys are somewhat forward thinking. Technology's moving awful quickly. Aaron and I, when we were talking yesterday, we were talking about the impact that AI is already beginning to have on the world. Um, there are a lot of people out there who stand staunchly opposed to farming and ranching in this country. For some reason, they think we can, like a replicator on Star Trek, we could just make food out of thin air. And they want to send out this message that it's agriculture that's responsible for climate change. It's agriculture. It's the meat industry. It's all of this, and they're the great Satan of climate change, which is really not the case. So when you think about emerging technologies like AI, what does FFA do? What do farmers and ranchers do? And what do we do as a nation to get ahead of the curve? Because if these people are putting out their message on AI and it's going across social media like wildfire, people listen to whoever's at the mic. They don't really go and do research. So what do we do to try to get ahead of that?
We are actually having a conversation in New York FFA right now on how do we combat AI as a state and as a state organization. And we're still in the mix in the very front of this conversation, but again, trying to get ahead of it before it kind of takes over. But I think that within the agriculture community in general, we have a really hard time putting ourselves at the blame. And I think that sometimes we make it out to be like two very clear sides, the people who get it and the people who don't. And sometimes that is very true. But I think that as long as we fight every day to tell our story and our experiences, and just share our knowledge, we're going to hopefully be able to spread that message like wildfire. And I've been working with the Northeast Feed and Agribusiness Association. We were actually having conversations yesterday about this exact topic, on how do we share our stories effectively, to be able to help the agricultural community stay in its presence and move forward.
Yeah, I almost feel like we're not quite to the precipice as a nation, but boy, are we getting close to the edge with some of these messages that I hear people in Congress and local legislators and environmental activists talking about. And it's like, no, it's nothing they're saying is accurate. But the speed that AI can push things out with and change, change perspectives. I was telling Aaron, my website for my business, the Squarespace now has an AI integration to be able to write things. And so I literally can, like Chat GPT, I can write a prompt that says, write a description for this, for a podcast episode with, Ella Underberg, state president, New York FFA. We talk about and list the 3 topics, and it will knock out in like 5 seconds, 5 or 6 paragraphs, like in full detail of what we talked about. And I'm like, how? And if that's just on just creative writing, what happens when they're using AI to produce video, produce content that's false? I think about some of these undercover stings that have gone on at dairy farms and things like that, where ultimately you come to find out that the people that were abusing the cattle were actually the activists, because they went in and it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. They went in and the animals were actually well cared for. And so, well, we've got to get the video, so we're going to abuse the animals ourselves and then blame the farmer. They don't even have to they don't have to infiltrate anymore. They can just use AI and produce a video. Like, how do we beat that?
It's crazy. Like the stories that I hear that are going on are really just like wow is the only word I really can use to like properly explain the emotions that happen. I think that this next generation, FFA members, 4-H members, manners, even Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, this is going to be we have a few main issues that are going to be like the challenges of our lifetime. And one of them is feeding that growing population. And the second one is going to be combating AI and opposing stories and things like that. And I think
Yeah,
that farmers have always had to overcome the struggle of properly telling the story of agriculture and sharing the importance. But as people are getting further and further removed from the farm, that story is getting even tougher to tell because the population that is able to tell that story is decreasing. I
yeah,
get a little bit of hope though with almost 1 million FFA members across the country. We're able to grow our numbers. So hopefully in 5 to 10 years down the line, we're going to have almost 1 million people sharing the story of agriculture through their own lens and their experiences. And all the experiences are life-changing ones. Not only my story and the story of my teammates and New York FFA members, but FFA members everywhere are able to share these positive stories, experiences, and tell that story of agriculture.
for sure. Well, you're currently state president at New York FFA. That sounds like that's a pretty big deal. How'd you end up in that position?
Earlier I talked about my advisor, Miss Nickerson.
Hmm.
She has always been one of my biggest supporters since my first day of freshman year, sitting in her introduction to agriculture class. During my senior year, serving as our District 9 president, she was like, "Are you going to run for state office?" And I was like, "I don't know. Like, I feel like going to college next year, that's going to be really tough. Like, I don't know if I'm really quite cut out for that." And she was like, "No, you got to run. Like, we'll work on your application today." And she is a really hard woman to say no to. So I did.
You
And
were,
I
once again, you were voluntold.
yeah, of course. And I remember I texted my mom and I was like, "Mom, Miss Nickerson wants me to run for state office." And she was like, "That's amazing. You should do that." And I was like, "Oh, okay. You're also a really hard woman to say no to." Um, so I ended up submitting my application and then I attended the state leaders experience in Albany and I was surrounded by so many, just like such a diverse pool of leaders from across New York State. And I was so inspired by their stories and what they were doing to tell the story of agriculture and how they were serving the agriculture community in their regions. And I was just like, wow, I need to do more.
Yeah,
So then I was like, okay, we're going to take this application seriously. So I started doing some more research and some more just like studies on the ag community and reaching out to people across New York State about their ag story and things like that. And then when I showed up for the 3-day interview process, I was like, you know what? We're going to give this my all. And if I'm one of the 6 that the nominating committee would like to serve next year, that is an amazing opportunity. But if not, like I know that the 6 that will be serving will do New York State so much good. I remember sitting in the selection process with 13 other amazing members from across New York State and just thinking like, wow, like how am I going to compete against these people? We were able to sit down at night and just share stories and our FFA experience and kind of like the highlights of our journey. And like those 13 other members, like we still all keep in touch today and we're all really great members. And I know one of my great friends, Natalie, she's off at college, joining organizations and still fighting for the ag community.
that's awesome. Um, so now that you're state president, when do you go off? When are you done?
I am done the first weekend in May.
First weekend in May. So by the time this airs here in a few weeks, you'll have just a couple months left. How
Mhm.
has this position allowed you to be of service to your fellow FFA members in New York?
I think that all state officers across the country will be able to agree with me on this, that um, being in this position just gives you the opportunity to like kind of level up your leadership. You're given the opportunity to be present. And personally, I find that one of the greatest qualities of leader is just showing up and being in the moment, being where your feet are, not worried about things happening elsewhere, just like truly being present for those around you. And I think that this past year has allowed me to do that on multiple different occasions. Competitions at the state fair or state officer tour and visiting these members' chapters and seeing what they're doing in their own programs, and heading off to nationals and being able to support them when they're competing nationally. Going to the Grow New York event and watching them present to a panel of judges. I think that this position has allowed me to just meet so many people, and just be truly present in the moment, which again, like I think is one of the greatest qualities of a leader. And being present in the moment has just allowed me to kind of open my eyes to see what else everybody else is doing.
Sure. What kind of opportunities has your involvement in FFA given you already? And what are some of the future opportunities that you see, and doors that are being opened for you because of this?
Yeah, when I remember last year at state convention, May of 2023, putting on this jacket for the first time in front of thousands of New York FFA members, I was like, whoa, what did I get myself into? Um, but since then, I've just been able to enjoy all of these opportunities. A couple of my highlights of this journey was state officers are invited to head to DC in July, where we're able to kind of network with each other and learn about advocacy and be able to kind of grow within our positions. And I remember meeting some other state officers there, and I was just like, wow. And then I've been able to see them so many other times throughout this year in their jackets and just sharing stories about our states and agriculture. My teammate Courtney, our state vice president, and I actually just got home from Australia about a month ago. We headed off
Lovely.
to yeah, we headed off to Australia for 12 days, and we were able to learn about agriculture over there, and kind of what are they doing to solve some of those issues that we were talking about earlier, to be able to get ahead of it as a country. We met with their New Farmers Association and kind of chatted with those young ladies about what is their organization doing to support farmers and encourage growth within the farming community. And then again, just being able to meet amazing people from across the country like you, and being able to head off and kind of meet with other organizations and see what they're doing from their aspect of agriculture.
As you've gone through this journey, we've talked about some of the skills you have developed. Any of those skills that kind of surprised you that suddenly you're like, wow, I could not do that before. I would never have thought I had that skill. And now you do.
Yeah, I think before I put on this association jacket, I didn't realize how much I love to network. And I think my mom has kind of seen how much I love to network and kind of has helped me to find opportunities to be able to do that. As a member, you're offered opportunities to network with other members from across the state. Well, I just thought that was making friends. And it was. And then as I've been able to put on this association jacket, you're kind of starting to network with people a little bit older than you and meeting with adults and kind of sharing knowledge back and forth with them. And I think that I've been able to find a little networker in me, and just
Yep.
kind of wanting to strike up conversations with people and see what they're doing, to help the ag community and see what they're doing back home, to feed their community and support their families and things like that.
Well, that networking, that's a golden ticket for you. I can tell you, having met you, and I know your mom, will talk about that here in a few minutes. Um, but having met you, you don't present yourself the way like when we see the news, when we hear these stories, when we flip through Instagram and see what your generation is doing on social media, that is just so embarrassing. I want to just tell the world that you're seeing this such a small clip of that generation, that I really believe your generation is full of young people that look just like you, that behave just like you, that understand their responsibilities to their community, and that there's a time to grow up, there's a time to be a kid, and there's a time to balance that and time to grow up. And I just think there's way more people in your generation that look and act like you and believe the way you do than what we see on TikTok.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think that if anybody is starting to get worried about this next generation, I just encourage you to go sit in on an FFA convention or a competition. Like I promise you, you will not be disappointed by what you're seeing. I know that FFA members all over are working every day to enhance their communities and enhance their leadership and serve those around them. Like if you're ever getting worried, I promise you, even not just an FFA, go to a 4-H event or a manners event. I promise you will not be disappointed.
So I got a question for you here. This one actually comes from Aaron Alejandro. And I know you know who Aaron is. He's down there at the Texas FFA Foundation. Really good guy. As soon as I called him, I said, "Hey, I've got Ella Underberg coming on the show." And he was like, "Oh, that's amazing. Like he knows you, knows your mom." Right. And I said, "But you know me, I know FFA people wear blue jackets and they're super respectful. But that is the extent of my FFA knowledge. What could I ask her that would be a good question to ask someone in FFA?" So this one comes from Aaron Alejandro, and his question is, how does FFA give a student like you a competitive advantage among their peers?
Yeah, I think that even you just even saying just now that, FFA has blue jackets and that they're raising respectful young adults. I think that any FFA member that is able to throw that on their resume and some of the experiences as they have, um, anybody who sees that, I think that all kind of share that same experience of just knowing the amount of respect that FFA members give off for those around them and the amount of service they're able to give. I think that the competitive advantage that FFA members gets is sitting on an interview. If somebody sees that, I think you're already kind of leveled up in their mind. They kind of know like that's the respect that we give, and they're able to give that respect back. So I think just knowing that um, you're maybe somebody who's worn this amazing blue and fashionable jacket, may I add, kind of gives you a
I
little
don't
bit
know
of
about
competitive.
fashionable.
I'll stick by my statement.
Okay.
Um, just kind of gives you the advantage of just the amount of knowledge that people have in FFA, even just knowing that it's the blue jacket. And like you said, like respect are the first two things that come to mind for you personally. I know I've met a lot of people that it's the same case.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting as we've had this conversation. I think back to when I was like in my early 20s, first starting to kind of venture into the fair market a little bit. And I remember hearing about things like FFA, and I might have even heard about it as early as high school. Of course, I grew up in the city, so not a lot of rural ag stuff going on in the city of Albuquerque. It's out on the outskirts. It's in places like Roswell and where there's a lot of, ag stuff going on. Um, but I remember hearing somebody at one point saying something to the effect of, "Oh, if they're an FFA, I'll give them." They were older. If this person's an FFA, I would give them their resume another look. I would really give it serious consideration. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I can tell you as a 44-year-old business owner now, granted, I don't have employees, but if I've got employees or if I've got people that are applying for a job and it says Texas FFA, New York FFA, New York FFA state president, I'm like, that person's probably into the final round straight away, just because I know the product that FFA is making. The FFA isn't about so much. I don't think FFA grows food. I think FFA grows strong citizens in this country. I think you guys have a fabulous organization.
I would have to agree. Like we might not, some of our members surely are out in the fields every day and producing the crop of our toil and things like that. But a majority of our members aren't necessarily coming from that farming background,
Hmm,
but instead are investing themselves into the leadership and, like you said, like just turning out to be great citizens. And I think both our members that are out in the fields and the ones that are investing in leadership are both doing amazing things for the future.
for sure. One last question here before I shift over on topics. This one might put a little bit of pressure on you. Describe the entirety of your FFA experience in one word.
I would have to say just a blessing. If I had to pick one word, a blessing.
Excellent. Yeah, it does seem like this is something that you have flourished in. I've only known you for a very short time. I mean, your mom's talked about you for years, but we've only met at this point 2 months ago. But I can see it in you. I can see how this organization has changed your life, and you've impacted FFA in there in New York for the better. But let's shift up here real quick. I'd like folks to be able to get to know Ella, the person, kind of separate from Ella, the state president. Let's get this one off the table. Anybody who recognizes your name but may not actually know you, you've actually got a pretty well-known mama in this industry. Tell us about her.
Okay, first of all, my mom, she's great. I love her so much. So growing up, obviously, with a mom in the industry and the CEO of the Erie County Fairgrounds here in New York, I've always been surrounded by the fair industry and known the benefits of growing up between fairs and livestock shows and things like that. I think she has just worked so hard to make a name for herself in the fair industry as a whole.
Yep.
And she has just inspired my sister and I and other kids in our community just to strive for excellence.
Yeah, and for anybody, I'm sure anybody listening has put this all together by now. Mom is Jessica Underberg, CEO of the Erie County Fair there in Hamburg, New York, right outside of Buffalo. We had her on the show back during the pandemic, discussing the black cloud that was that entire experience. And even then, in the middle of all that, I had to admire her optimism and her hope for a strong future. Clearly, that has rubbed off on you. What character traits do you think you got from your mom versus the traits you got from your dad?
So if you were ever to meet my mom and my dad in the same setting,
Hmm.
I don't know if you would necessarily put them together. They are kind of like two completely different people,
Okay.
but in the same way, just match each other so well. My mom is very just an optimistic, forward thinker, very organized, very present in the moment, just constantly thinking about what she can do to serve those around them and better the experience for everyone. And I definitely get her optimism and her organization, but my dad, he is just so happy-go-lucky and is constantly just thinking about how can I make everybody laugh right now? What is a joke I could do? But he is just such a gentleman. He is always the last person to sit down in a room, the last person to grab their food, and is just constantly looking out for everybody else. So I think that I've just kind of got the best of both of them and just being able to like have just pure service for others. And I would have to say the same about my sister. She is also just such like a servant of others and is just always looking around to see who she can help in the room and what she can do to better experience for everybody in the room.
Well, having met your mom and had many discussions with her, I don't know that I've had an opportunity to meet your dad yet. You all definitely have servants' hearts. You all are fantastic people. I joked with your mom. I dubbed her during the pandemic when I did that show with her. I dubbed her my fair sister. Um, I guess that makes you my fair niece,
I think it does.
right? Just fantastic people. I'm curious though, outside of FFA, what is it you're most passionate about doing?
I read a book a while back that says that everybody has two values in life. You may not know exactly what they are, but you lead everything that you do by these two values. Um, and I very quickly, as soon as I read that book, I was like, done. I already know what my number one value is, and it's family. I come from a pretty big family, but I'm very passionate about just spending quality time with my family. I have loads and loads of cousins, and I do many of the things I love doing with them. My little cousin Olivia, we show lambs together, and now we might be getting her to show some goats. But being able to spend time with her, spend time with all of my aunts, go and hang out with my uncles. I'm just very passionate about spending quality time with people, and especially with my family. Super Bowl parties, board game nights, even just dinners back at the house. I'm very passionate about any free time I have, being able to spend it with my loved ones.
Got it. It sounds like family is like a huge core. That is your core value.
Yeah.
Excellent. We alluded to it a little bit earlier. We kind of discussed it just a little bit. What's something you think the media gets wrong about your generation?
Um, I think especially during 2020, this came a little bit relevant. I saw so many TikToks because I do spend a fair amount of time on TikTok every day. I am one of those teenagers.
You got to get
About
off that
just
stuff.
I know
It's all
about
Chinese communist propaganda.
about teenagers just sitting on the couch and eating chips. And I do love myself a good bag of sun chips. But when I look around and look at my friends and fellow FFA members, even outside of New York, I think that this generation is very thoughtful and passionate about ensuring that we have a world worth living in by the time we're at the age of retirement or in the mix of our job and things like that, that we want a world that is still worth living in 20, 30, even 50 years down the road for our potential kids. And I think that this generation, there is still a good chunk of kids and teenagers and young adults working every day to make sure that we have that world to live in.
Herb, it's just excellent. Listen, we've been coming or discussing on this podcast here, coming up on 40 minutes. It's gone quick. It's gone quick. So I want to wrap up. Everybody that comes on the show goes through a little lightning round of questions. And so I'm going to ask you a handful of quick questions. You give me your best answer. Are you ready, State President Ella Underberg?
I am ready.
Biggest pet peeve. You can't say your sister.
Okay. When people are eating and they bite on their silverware.
People chew on their silverware?
Like when they go to take a bite and they're like, they chomp their teeth.
Oh, instead of just getting the food they get there.
Yes.
All right. So next time I see you at IFE, you and your mom and I were gonna go eat, and I'm gonna chomp on the fork the whole time just to annoy you. Favorite fair food?
Deep fried Oreos.
A movie is made about your life. Who plays the role of Ella?
My sister.
Your sister? That like
Yeah.
you say that, and I'm like, it hits me in the feels. I figured you'd be like, Scarlett Johansson or something. You're like, nah, my sister. Ella, girl, that hits me right in the feels. I'm telling you. All right. I'd like you to recommend one book or one movie to our 6 listeners. What book would you recommend?
I talked about the values a few minutes ago. That book is actually Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. I think
Dare
there's
to
just
Lead.
so much, yep, I think there's just so much inspiration inside that book.
Okay, and I think you might have already kind of alluded to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. This is a generational question. If you have to use only one, Snapchat, Instagram, or TikTok?
I'd have to say Snapchat so that I
Wow.
can see all of my aunt and uncle's funny videos that they like to put up.
Oh, because your aunts and uncles are using Snapchat. It aged up. It aged up. See, the old people came to Snapchat, I guess. That's funny. Ella, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
I would just like to thank you for having me. When you reached out, I was super excited. So thank you for having me here.
Anytime. We loved having you. Where can listeners learn more about New York FFA?
We're pretty prominent on social media. So our tagline is NYSFFA, and you can find all things New York FFA there.
Excellent. To our listeners, I really hope you all enjoyed this episode today. It was a real privilege, Ella, to have you on the show and discuss FFA. For our listeners, if you've got young people and you're looking for something, an activity for them, it's easy to just default to like, well, do they need to play Little League? Do they need to play youth football? Do they need to do karate? Do they need to do dance? If there's an FFA chapter organization nearby you, I would highly recommend you get your kids at least a taste of it. I think they will be better people in the long run, and it benefits all of us. Such a great organization. Ella, wonderful having you on the show today. Thanks for being with us. To all you listening, we will catch you next week. Bye-bye.